In this program, we're going to be talking about self-duality, which might sound like a scary word, but it's actually pretty much the same thing as what we've been talking about throughout this course. Is this idea has constantly recurred that if you have two elements, there can't be a fundamental separation between them. Even though they are different, their relationship between the two serves as a common medium for their joint definition, meaning that the relationship between two things is more fundamental than either of the things which are being related. So, for example, we've discussed this with mind equals reality, is that they form what's called a syntactic unisect, in which the shared medium of mind and reality is more fundamental either than mind and reality, and they cannot be defined in any way relevant to their structure and processing apart from that relationship, either mind or reality. Same thing with the relationship between syntax and state is actually there's a shared medium for both syntax and state whereby they are dually inclusive. Syntax contains state just as state contains syntax, and the relationship between those two serves as an intrinsic medium for reality. That was the principle of hology. So now we're kind of applying the same thing to a more general framework, to self-duality, which says that whenever you have, this is much like Syndifianism, so whenever you have two distinct elements, they are actually self-dual to one another. There's not this dualism, there's not this fundamentally irresolvable separation between the two aspects which you've pointed out, but actually, fundamentally, they have to be the same on a reductive level. So that's let's jump right into it. This is some very interesting stuff, although this is a little bit more dense than some of the other material. But basically the idea is like the basic idea of duality is expressed through this idea of 2 points determine a line and two 2 points that aren't in the same location determine a line. You can draw a line between them, and two lines that aren't parallel to one another will intersect, and at that intersection is a point. So 2 points determine a line, two lines determine a point. So basically you dualize that relationship, and you can kind of find how there is a duality between lines and points. So that is a very basic instance of duality. However, there are much more complex versions of duality, which we'll get into, some of which are original to the CTMU's presentation. So basically, in the CTMU, there is space-object duality, and that is basically generalized to, as well as time-space duality, but those are all kind of generalized to time-space-object duality, or rather time-space-object triality, which says that in order to pinpoint any particular object, you need to know its location in space and time. So the element, as well as its spatiotemporal relations, defines its position. So you have to have all three of those dually embedded within one another. So you have to have at the same point in time, at the same location in space, and then you have that object, that event. And together, these dualities add up to the concept of trialities. You have space object, and then you have time space. And time space are related to one another, just as in space as information and time as information processing. So you have information processing, and that which is being informed, or that which is informing, which is the object. So all of these three things have a trialic relationship between the three. And you have this third kind of duality, which is space-time object duality. So in that kind of duality, you actually get something called conspansive duality, which is the way that the universe exists as a self-representational entity through its own intrinsic medium to internally simulate its material contents. So he says, in this kind of duality, something called conspansive duality, objects can be dualized to spatio-temporal transducers, meaning that they are processing information about space-time, because remember, space-time is a self-synthesizing informational system. So objects are informational and spatio-temporal transducers, and the physical universe is internally simulated by its material contents. So basically, with respect to conspansive duality, you can think about the universe as being a self-simulation whereby there's this internal informational processing whereby the universe is representing itself and has this generalized form of holography, not in the sense of a hologram where it's something externally projected, but is internally projected. There's an intrinsic projection of reality, which is why it's called a self-simulation rather than a simulation. So the principle of conspansive duality evolves from this idea of an expanding universe, which you might have heard as a concept in the physical sciences. But really, that doesn't make too much sense when you think about it, because again, if there were external scale or duration to the universe, then there would not. Then you could picture a more general medium in which that contained reality but did not contain space and time. So space and time have to be essentially emergent features of reality, whereas the reality medium itself is fundamental. So Langen illustrates this distinction by the distinction between the expanding rubber sheet universe and the universe as a self-representational entity. The expanding rubber sheet universe is the model of the universe that is used in most physical sciences, is that it's basically, the universe is expanding into some sort of nebulous external space. That doesn't really work within the confines of reality theory. Actually, what the universe is doing is it is expanding into itself. It is internally simulating its contents, and the C rate, the rate of expansion, the rate of conspansion, is actually turns out to be kind of just an intrinsic metric whereby reality is parameterizing its evolution. Actually, what's happening is as the next states of the material contents are being simulated within the inner expansive domains of the previous ones, the contents of reality are getting smaller relative to its medium. But since there's no since there's no absolute scale, this isn't really super relevant to anything within reality. It's just there's kind of a different state of the self simulation going on, but it isn't like the reality is getting bigger. Actually, the cosmic redshift can be accounted for just based on this self-representational aspect of the universe. So this was satirized by Arthur Eddington in his book, The Expanding Universe, as he's like, well, if there's an expanding universe, technically that means there could also be a shrinking atom. And I just want to read this because I love this passage. It's so funny. He says, we walk the stage of life, performers of a drama for the benefit of the cosmic spectator. As the scenes proceed, he notices that the actors are getting smaller and the action quicker. When the last act opens, the curtain rises on midget actors rushing through their parts at frantic speed. Smaller and smaller, faster and faster, one last microscopic blur of intense agitation, and then nothing. So basically, this is actually considered to be, even though Eddington kind of abandoned this idea, this is actually true in the CTMU, even though he's like, oh, the shrinking atom is not, that's kind of an absurdist, it's kind of a joke. But actually, that's basically what's happening, is that the contents of reality are getting smaller relative to their universe. And that's and there's not this ectomorphic motion whereby things are expanding outwards, but rather, if you can picture this, they're expanding inwards. Because there's no absolute metric, it doesn't really matter whether you think about the universe as expanding relative to its contents or the contents contracting relative to their universe. Either way, that there is this self-processing speed at which the universe is representing itself, and that is basically what we observe as physical expansion from the perspective of us within the universe. So actually, it's an endomorphism. It's a shape within, and reality is taking on the shape of its intrinsic medium for the purpose of its self-evolution. So in an ectomorphism, Langen says something is mapped to, generated, or replicated in something external to it. However, the reality principle asserts that the universe is self-contained. And ectomorphism is inconsistent with self-containment because, again, ecto literally means outside. There's nothing outside reality. That's the number one principle of the CTMU. So through the principle of conspansive duality, ectomorphism is conjoined with endomorphism, which is a mapping within. whereby things are mapped, generated, or replicated within themselves. So everything is happening internally to the reality system. So through conspansive endomorphism, and we'll get to what conspansion is in a later presentation, but through this endomorphism, through this internal mapping, things are basically injectively mapped into their own hological interiors. So there's this inner expansive domain, and they are actually mapped inwardly within themselves. So that's what we observe as the contraction of contents or the expansion of the universe, is that things are mapped within their previous states. And so they're actually getting smaller, like the shrinking atom, from their own syntactic boundaries. So they rules and structure of each of that are in the universal distributed form are basically going to contain all of the prior states of an object, and that allows it to evolve through time in a way concomitant with the universe's self-generative evolution. So basically, new states are formed within the image of previous states. That's what I just said. One of the principles of the CTMU is that nothing moves. It's all just dynamical rescaling. So there's this rescaling of the universe, which is intrinsic to itself. There's not anything externally going on. Just things are. You can think of it like a computer simulation. It has memory of all of the things that it has previously done, and yet, meanwhile, it is also evolving at every moment, and it has a fixed display, but anything can be displayed on that monitor. Same thing with reality. So each relocation of an object, Langan says, is a move from one level of perfect stasis to another. So nothing is actually moving. Actually, the entire system is rescaling and re-evolving, but it's not happening at the level of an object. There's no way to say, my hand is moving through space. Actually, the space is regenerating itself at every single instant. And that is a way more advanced model of motion than even we have in the physical sciences, which doesn't really make any attempt to explain it, and hasn't since like the days of Aristotelian physics. So nothing is moving or expanding. Actually, the universe is representing itself. The universe is a self-representational entity that joins conventional motion in the linear ectomorphic semi-model and conventional expansion to conspansion and evolution, wherein there's this endomorphism, there's an internal mapping, wherein reality is constantly recreating itself according to its self-generative evolution, and its self-model is a self-representational entity. So basically the space-time evolves linguistically as well as geometrically. It is evolving using the self-configuring, self-processing language as a control language for its self-generative evolution. And so basically it's mapping within itself to evolve and adapt, and we observe this as physical expansion, but really this is just the way that reality is evolving, but that's observed to us, and itself. So basically, what this implies that the self-representation of reality will be observed by us as expansion. And since there is no other really accepted physical model of like why the universe is expanding, not there are some physical theories, but like at the fundamental level, then parsimony actually asks us to favor the CTMU for as giving like the only like full explanation for like why we would expect to observe that we live in an expanding universe. And this is actually one of the empirical predictions of the CTMU. There are a couple, and two of those include the speed of light being a constant. So that means that you can't have anything going more than like 300,000 kilometers a second or something, because that's the rate of the universe's conspansion, and anything which goes faster than the rate of the universe's evolution cannot be represented in the terminal domain. And that's why light can't travel faster than that, even though it kind of represents pure information. And same thing with the cosmic expansion, the universe. The CTMU predicts that we would observe the universe to be expanding at an accelerating rate, because of this inward self-substitution and this constant metric whereby reality is rescaling at the rate of the speed of light, basically. So the and it actually says that we would expect from the CTMU that there would be no way to distinguish between outward expansion and inward substitution of content. So actually, both of these things are happening. There's a duality between them, and what the self-duality is, what the relationship between them is, the self-representational evolution of the universe. So this is so basically, there's no external dimension. You can't say the universe, the reality. Well, you can say the universe. We could say that it's a sub simulation, but like we can't say reality is getting bigger. That's not an intelligible statement. Because reality is intrinsically defined with respect to like its own proportions. It's independent of any distinctions involving external measure. It's not like, oh, it's 10 billion feet. It's like, no, that's not how you measure something like that. So conspansive duality. So this is a principle called conspansive duality, which says that basically we would expect the universe as a self-representational entity to be viewed as an expanding rubber sheet universe from the perspective of an observer within reality, as USCRE conspans, which we'll get into what that means later, but it basically just means evolving. As USCR conspans, holding the size of the universe invariant while allowing object sizes and timescales to shrink in mutual proportions, preserves like general covariance. So basically, things are still proportional to one another, even as we have this like shrinking atom where the cosmic observer is watching, and there's like tiny midgets on stage all running around really fast and speeding up, or it's like 2x speed. But it's still doing this. We know from metaphysics that the universe is actually a self-representational entity, and we know from the CTMU why we observe that as an expanding rubber sheet universe, and why that is the general opinion of science. So this is so that is the escape from the infinite tower of turtles, is that this explanatory regress where we have to keep explaining things at lower and lower levels, is that this changing size ratio actually, that's not the most important part. The most important part is that the universe is able to serve as its own intrinsic medium for its evolution and self-sustenance, and that means that the universe is constantly evolving, was able to program itself. It is able to bring it to ascribe existence to itself in a way outside of time, and so that's why it is in the CTMU. It's just like the principle of equivalence is called the midwife of general relativity. Conspansive duality can be thought of as the midwife of the CTMU's model of physics, is because like it is because you have this intrinsic background, whereby the universe self-configures through set temporal feedback. So this is basically the explanatory infrastructure of the metaphysical ontology principle, is that is that all of the is that the self-creation, self-sustaining, and self-explanation of the universe all occur through this conspansive manifold. So each so basically this allows reality to configure itself retrocausally, to bring itself into existence and ascribe existence to itself, and thereby reality can be said to create itself as well, through this feedback between syntax and state, and this programming whereby it takes this set of potentials from the syntactic metaverse, which is basically this abstract space of potential, which embodies the potential for any actual universe, and then it self-configures retrocausally. It goes back in time and is like, oh, well, this is a desirable configuration for the self-expression and self-identification of reality, and then it basically has the ability to bring itself into existence. Langen says, eliminate conspansion and reality becomes an inexplicable space full of deterministic world lines and the weighty load of problems that can be expected when geometry is divorced from logic. So exactly. So what we need to do with the CTMU is we need to have a logico-geometric structure. We need to combine logic and geometry. This is what Langen says. He was 15 years old. He was my age. He was reading in the back of his covered wagon. He's reading Bertrand Russell and Einstein. He was saying these things need to be put together. We need to put together logic and geometry in order to have a full model of the universe. So if you eliminate conspansion, if you eliminate that, you also eliminate the ability for the universe to have this not only logico-geometric structure, but also this self-deterministic structure. And basically you'd either have either total randomness or total determinacy without this intrinsic structure. So reality is reality based, so the universe is a self-representational entity that appears to us as expanding, but really the if we observe the logical implications of why the universe looks like it's expanding, then we actually discover some very important principles about the CTMU and the universe's evolution through conspansion. Thank you. Take care. God bless.